Good morning, folks. If you're just joining us, we're gonna allow others to also join us. So we will give others maybe 2, 3 minutes, something like that, and we will begin our morning scoop this morning. Good morning, folks. Again, if you're just joining us, thank you for spending this morning with us. We will give others maybe 2 more minutes, something like that, to also join us, and we will begin the forum at 8:01 in the morning. All right, I think it's 8:01 in the morning. And I think we are going to start. Good morning, folks. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Arizona Capital Times morning scoop on criminal justice. The big question is this the year for criminal justice reform? And when I say this year, I mean 2021. My name is Luigi Del Puerta. I'm the associate publisher and editor of the Arizona Capital Times. Thank you again for spending your morning with us. First, I want to thank our sponsors this morning for engaging with us this way and supporting us. Without their support, we are not able to hold public policy forums such as the one that we are holding this morning. I want to thank Middle Ground Prison Reform for sponsoring us this morning. Middle Ground is an all-volunteer organization which engages in public education, legislative advocacy, and constituent advocacy to protect and define the rights and responsibilities of the incarcerated in Arizona prisons and jails. They're experts in prison policy, operations, and law. I also want to thank our co-sponsors this morning, the law firm of Michael P. Dinee. Michael P. Dinee is a full-service boutique criminal defense firm specialized exclusively in criminal justice, criminal appeals, and administrative pen proceedings. Also want to thank Berg Simpson Attorneys. Berg Simpson Attorneys are dedicated to helping catastrophically injured people rebuild their lives after a serious accident. And finally, I want to thank our final co-sponsor, Jones Skelton and Hockley, with almost 90 lawyers. Jones Skelton and Hockley PLC is among the largest and most experienced law firms of trial and appellate lawyers in Arizona, practicing in the areas of insurance and insurance coverage defense. Here to tell us more and to welcome us is Donna Leone Ham. Donna has 40 years experience in prisoner rights advocacy and in the criminal justice system. In 1980, she was appointed as a lower court judge in Coconino County and has worked as a lower court judge in both Coconino and Maricopa counties for a total of 11 years. She became active in prison reform when she co-founded Middle Ground and has served as its volunteer executive director since 1983. She also worked as executive director of Florence Crittenden Services of Arizona, the Arizona Attorneys for Criminal Justice, and the Arizona Child Care Association. Donna is self-employed as a criminal justice consultant, specializing in executive clemency, mitigation, and alternative pre-sentence investigation reports. She is also a licensed private pilot and a proud grandmother to 6 grandchildren. Donna?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. In 2021, Middle Ground will be observing our 40th year as an organization at the legislature, leading the way in prison and criminal justice reforms in Arizona when really no one else was doing it. We believe that reforms should take into account all perspectives, even those of people we don't agree with or organizations we don't agree with. All stakeholders, including prisoners, their families and supporters, prosecutors, victims, judges, corrections, and others, must be at the table in order to pass responsible reform laws. At Middle Ground, we consider ourselves practical idealists, which empowers us to openly consider all viewpoints. We do know that reforms are needed. Some would say a revolution is needed. Authentic public safety dictates that actual efforts to reduce crime must really begin with parents who know how to properly nurture emotionally healthy children and who are provided with resources in the community not connected to the criminal justice system when they need help. We need schools that are equipped to recognize behavioral problems and that can refer students and parents to resources that deliberately avoid the school to prison pipeline without regard to race, ethnicity, or economic standing. Substance abuse needs to be acknowledged for what it is, a medical problem, and it should be dealt with by medical professionals. And we sorely need to expand mental health resources in our communities, which do not involve police agencies at all. We need to stop trying juveniles as adults, limit the use of mandatory minimum sentences and mandatory consecutive sentences, and make the entire system equally just and fair to all. In short, if we truly aim to reduce the prison population in Arizona, in order to have the financial resources to do these things, we need to divert as many people as possible from the early beginning clutches of the revolving door of our present criminal justice system and its tragic long-term collateral consequences. We can't possibly discuss all of these issues today and all the other reforms that are needed, but our hope is to work within a 2021 legislative session that's open to ideas. No matter how many people we ultimately incarcerate, we must morally accept the responsibility to fully allocate the necessary funds to provide adequate medical care, mental health treatment, education, and reentry services, and insist on humane treatment at all times. I'll close by expressing our particular thanks to our panelists, all of whom have a wealth of information and expertise to share with you. And thanks, of course, to Arizona Capital Times for hosting this event. So let's have a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. We have a great panel this morning. Joining us is Senator-elect Kirsten Engel, who represents Legislative District 10. Senator-elect Engel was just elected to the Arizona Senate this November after serving in the Arizona House of Representatives. At the state capitol, Senator Engel is focused on, among other things, education, environment, the economy, ending gun violence, and of course, criminal justice. She will be a member of several Senate committees next year, but notably the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Engel is a professor at the University of Arizona College of Law, where she teaches environmental law and legislative analysis. She is working on several proposals that, among other things, seek to reduce Arizona's prison population. Senator, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Also joining us this morning is James Ham. James spent just under 18 years in the Arizona State Prison. While incarcerated, he devoted his energy to accepting personal responsibility for his crime and worked to improve himself. He earned a summa cum laude bachelor's degree in applied sociology from NAU, and he wrote grants for library services and self-development programs and served as a member of an inmate grievance review committee. While incarcerated, James prevailed in several lawsuits which served to protect the rights of prisoners. He was granted a governor's commutation of sentence due to exemplary behavior and, upon release on parole, was admitted to study at the ASU College of Law. He graduated law school and passed the bar exam, but was denied admittance to practice due to his felony. James started his own consulting business where he serves as an expert witness and paralegal consultant to attorneys representing clients on appellate matters. James is the director of legislative advocacy for Middle Ground Prison Reform, the premier prisoners' rights organization, which has been active since 1983. James, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Luigi. Can you hear me? Because my video is gone.
We can hear you just fine, James, and we can also see you just fine.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
And I'm sorry to hear that your video is gone, but we can certainly see you.
Okay, we'll just go ahead.
And finally, we have Representative Walt Blackman, who represents Legislative District 6. Representative Blackman is the incoming chairman of the House Criminal Justice Reform Committee, a new committee, which is tasked to devote and focus on criminal justice. Representative Blackman is the first Black American Republican, African-American Republican in the history of the Arizona legislature elected to the Arizona House of Representatives. He is an experienced senior leader and combat veteran with 2 decades of operational and combat real-world leadership experience in the U.S. military. He earned several military awards while serving his country, including the Bronze Star Medal for combat actions in Iraq and the Meritorious Service Medal for 21 years of continuous honorable active duty service. After his retirement in 2016, he founded and is currently president and CEO of WB Inclusion and Diversity Consulting Victim Advocacy Firm, which is a sexual assault counseling service provider for victims of sexual assault and sexual harassment. He is also a leading advocate of changes to the criminal justice system. Representative Blackman, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
So I guess I'll begin by asking both Senator-elect Kirsten Engel and Representative Blackman, what are you hearing about how the 2021 session is going to look like? I guess more specifically, have you heard from your leadership teams about, let's say, the opening day of the session? Let me start with Representative Blackman and then go to Senator Engel.
Well, good morning, everybody, again, and thanks for having me here. And the folks that are watching, good morning. And I hope you're having a great holiday season. What I've heard so far about opening day is that it could be held outside because of course, the coronavirus, to get more folks out there and have distance, that social distancing that is required. So that's what I've heard right now.
Thank you for that. So first day of session, maybe outside. All right, Senator Engel, what are you hearing, ma'am?
You know, all I know is that there's lots of discussions going on. I think folks are right now just grappling with how serious the coronavirus is in our state. It's just very worrisome, the hospital capacity issue. And so whatever we do, we have to make sure that, you know, we're protecting other members, many of which, you know, are actually elderly or have maybe a vulnerable person at home, the staff at the legislature, the public that comes to our to all the hearings and testifies, the lobbyists. So there's quite a lot of people, and so we have to make sure that we really do this responsibly. I think opening day outside is a great idea.
Thank you again both for that update. So Proposition 207, as you know, was overwhelmingly approved at the ballot box by the voters. It also allows individuals with certain marijuana charges to petition for expungement, if I'm not mistaken, beginning in July next year. In fact, already we saw the Maricopa County Attorney's Office deciding to drop all cases involving simple possession of marijuana. The big question, of course, is we don't have an expungement statute in our statutes. And let me go to James for this question. James, any ideas how or suggestions how the legislature actually go about creating expungement statutes?
Well, every time that there is an initiative passed, the legislature then adopts a number of statutes that implement that. And we don't know exactly at this time exactly what's going to go on. We do know that as of July the 21st, 2021, people will be able to petition the court for expungement of low-level, low quantity marijuana offenses. And we know that the initiative has also authorized, actually legalized recreational marijuana. And so we'll be advocating for legislation that will provide for a process for petitions to be filed. We hope that there will not be a filing fee for those because many people will be in financial difficulties. We'd like the process to be as simple and inexpensive as it possibly could. Middle Ground does have some questions about how effective expungement will be since we live in a digital world now.
Right, and we'll go into the details of that. You rightly pointed out that anything that's on the web, it's kind of there forever. But let me go to Representative Blackman, sir. How do you reckon we'll go about the expungement process, and what are you working on in terms of if you are going to be working on this one of facilitating and complying with the provisions of Proposition 207 insofar as allowing certain offenses to, or individuals with certain offenses, low-level marijuana offenses, to apply for expungement?
I think it's a good step in the right direction. As you remember my bill 2808, it had that in it, low-level drug crimes. The issue with the drug issue is that 70% of the folks that are sitting in DOC are there for drug-related issues. And instead of being in prison, they should be receiving some drug program rehabilitation help. Now with 207, those folks that have been charged with that particular drug crime, they should be expunged because now we have a law that has said that making recreational marijuana legal. So in my capacity as a chair and as a legislator, I'm certainly going to look for ways to come up with legislation to ease the transition from the category of a person being charged and that being on their record to expungement on those bills. I think it's important. It gets people back into the mainstream of life, gets them on the right path to recovery, and to make sure that they're being able to contribute.
Senator Engel, the same question to you, ma'am.
Yes, well, the percentage by which Prop 207 passed, I think is a real window into what the public feels about the criminalization of drug possession, specifically with respect to marijuana. And I think it's really important that we pay attention to that, and having for the first time a provision for expungement. I think it's something that we need to take seriously, make sure that the process works, because it'll be a precedent for expungement of possibly other crimes. But I did want to make a couple specific comments. My understanding is Prop 207 is in effect now. As soon as the Secretary of State certified the election results on November 30th, the proposition went into effect, and that actually includes the decriminalization of possession of marijuana and paraphernalia less than 2.5 ounces, as well as the recreational marijuana piece, which is 1 ounce or less, and the expungement provision. They are in effect now. The July 2021 date has to do with the other parts of the statute, the licenses and the rulemakings for putting the other parts of the initiative into effect. And right now, individuals, the county attorneys, as well as the Attorney General can petition for expungement. And I don't see actually a need for legislation here. Folks can file a motion and petition in court. I'm not seeing actually the requirement that we have to have legislation in order for this expungement provision that the citizens voted for and passed to go into effect.
Let me ask James and see if I think there are two kind of broad ideas, right? One is for the legislature to actually come up with expungement statutes that would facilitate, this expungement process. But Senator Engel, you're saying that you don't actually need the state legislature to approve these statutes. And so, in fact, let me follow up with you, Senator Engel. How do you, so by your understanding, then it will just be done through the court system. The courts will have to come up with the process themselves?
Yes, right now I know that just about every county attorney is already, it's been dismissing all of their pending charges that are covered by the statute, by the initiative. And we understand there's about something like 100 persons who are currently in DOC for crimes that have now been decriminalized with respect to marijuana. And I think the next step is really a question that we should be asking the county attorneys is, are you going to move to expunge those records of those persons who are in DOC? And then of course, individuals can petition and the county attorney can petition on their behalf. There's something like $4.4 million that are going to be set aside by this that will go to nonprofits to try to get the word out for individuals that they can expunge their past records. So I don't think that this is rocket science. I think a petition to expunge a charge or conviction or sentence that is clearly set forth in the initiative should be pretty straightforward.
Let me go to James, sir, your thoughts.
Well, Luigi, the initiative specifically provides that beginning July the 12th, 2021, an individual can petition the court for expungement. That doesn't really tell us exactly what expungement is going to mean in the current context. And certainly the Arizona Supreme Court will probably adopt rules that will govern many of these things. Whether or not legislation is actually required in order to create a process that's simple and effective and inexpensive for people to petition for expungement, we don't really know right now. But we Middle Ground would certainly support rules that will provide for a process for expungement, and we would certainly support legislation that streamlines the process and makes it easy and simple for people to use.
So there we have kind of outstanding questions out there insofar as this expungement process. What we know is what the initiative said, which is beginning of July of 2021, individuals can apply for expungement. Let me go to Representative Blackman, sir. You had been working on several bills in the last few years, really with the overall goal of trying to reduce the prison population. What are you thinking? What are the proposals that you will be focusing on in 2021?
Well, still my main focus is to reduce the prison population and DOC and to actually direct some of these folks into programming that's going to help them, partnered with outside programming and partnerships with organizations that help these folks. When I was talking about the legislation, I'm talking about not the legislation to expunge these folks, but the legislation to make it more streamlined, because we know this is a big change. And when bureaucracy gets involved, folks fall through the cracks. We have the internet that's available for people to look online and see if somebody has a record. The kind of legislation that I want to write makes this transition for an individual that is going through the expungement, the application phase, a little smoother for them, and mandates to some of these prosecuting offices that they have an X amount of time to execute the expungement application, so folks aren't waiting for years to get this done, because as we have seen in Colorado, that has happened in some of the cases. So just looking at other states that have done this, I just want to make sure we streamline this. This is the law now, and as a legislator, it's my responsibility to follow the law and carry out the law, and to make the law accessible to everyone in the state of Arizona. And as part of my duties, that's what I'm going to do. So that's the type of legislation that I am talking about.
James, before we leave the subject of expunsion, you mentioned earlier that you do have questions about its efficacy and how effective it's going to be, because once things are on the web or on the internet, well, they kind of stay there forever. But can you flesh out your concerns, sir?
Well, I think one of the concerns is that the initiative specifically says that a person who has applied for and received expungement does not have to answer questions about that particular felony conviction. One of the concerns we have is that in this age of Google, people will be able to access this information independently, and an employer might consider an answer like that to be less than candid. And so we don't really know exactly what's going to happen in the real world with people whose convictions have been expunged and who are applying for a job in the real world and indicating on an answer that they had not been convicted. So we don't really know. It is a problem because in the real world, there are collateral consequences to convictions, some of which continue for the rest of your life. And we know that we live in a world where information is widely available to anyone who has minimal skills at research. So these are concerns that we have.
Senator Engel, you've heard these concerns. Just real quick, sir, how do you think we can, well, I guess it's kind of an impossible question, right? How do you aptly address the fact that, once things are on the web or in the internet, it's really, they're kind of, they stay there forever. And so your record might be officially expunged, but potentially people could still, in fact, see your background, still see your criminal record, and potentially affect your ability to get a job.
Yeah, it's a big concern. And I did actually want to correct myself. You are correct about that July 2021 date. I was just wanting to make sure that people understood that the initiative is in effect now, even though the petitions are delayed. But that is a real problem. The initiative does direct that the clerk of court is supposed to contact the Department of Public Safety, clear all the records. So, government has to do its part in terms of seeking to expunge and seal those records that exist. I guess the initiative uses the term sealing those records, but you're right, a lot of this is on the internet. And so I think that we're going to have to ask employers and others to really look at the purpose and spirit of this initiative here, which is really to give people a second chance. And, to not hold that record that they might find on the internet against somebody who's applying for a job or for housing or some kind of educational program.
Senator-elect Engel, I think you were cutting in and out there for the last 5 seconds or so. Can you repeat your last 2 sentences, ma'am?
Oh, just that, we'd ask that employers, landlords, really try to put into effect the spirit of this initiative and not hold somebody's past conviction against them if they find it on the internet when it otherwise should be expunged or sealed.
All right, so we still have outstanding questions insofar as expungement. Among them, of course, is like when soon can the records be expunged, and of course, you'll have to in more ways than one work with the Department of Corrections and see to it that the process is actually in place before July 2021, something like that. But let me go to Representative Blackman, sir. What are your, insofar as the overall goal of reducing the prison population in the state, what are you thinking of introducing in terms of legislation next year?
You cut out in your last, so I'm assuming you said, what am I thinking about introducing?
Yes, next year. Insofar as bills next year, what do you think? What are your, let's say, your big one or two items for, specifically on this area of, the efforts to over the years reduce the state's prison population?
Well, I'm going to reintroduce 2808, because I think that's an important piece of legislation as we move forward in criminal justice reform. As we've seen over the past year, a lot of incidents have happened in our criminal justice system, not only here in Arizona, but across the nation. And criminal justice reform is on the forefront of a lot of folks' minds. So 2808 is a step in the right direction to try to reform our process. But it requires more than just that bill that I'm running. We need to take a deep dive, look into DOC. We need to take a look at sentencing structures. We need to take a look at the amount of time somebody is spending in prison for low-level nonviolent crimes. And then we need to take a look at the programming. And that is part of my effort and part of the bills that I'll be running this year. I am running another particular bill, and it's an ombudsman bill. And DOC is not going to like this bill. However, it's sort of an overwatch. So we can make sure that the things that are supposed to happen in DOC happens, like locks are replaced, people are getting the treatment that they need, victims are getting the help that they need, and then transition services are actually working. So I'm excited about this year coming up, particularly those two bills. I'm working with a lot of folks on those two pieces of legislation, and I'm hoping that they will sail through like 2808 sailed through last year.
Sir, can you just give us a brief discussion of 2808, from last year, what it seeks to do, and in specifically in what ways and in which ways it can help reduce the prison population?
Well, 2808 is targeted to low-level, non-violent, non-dangerous crimes. The problem with some of that language that we are fixing this year is that there are different definitions for violent and non-violent, or violent and dangerous, that the DOC categorize when these folks go into prison. So if a person is not really a bona fide violent person, when they get into the prison system, they go through their assessment, then they could be assessed as violent because of something that had happened 20 years ago in their past. So that's part of the thing that I want to work in the bill. We're talking early release. So a lot of these folks would still serve their time, but they would serve their time outside of the prison walls, being connected with the programming and drug treatment and so on and so forth. 2808 is designed, when we're talking monetarily, and we got this from JLBC, is to begin to start saving the state of Arizona $432 million a year. That $432 million goes back into programming, goes back into early treatment, goes back into education. So we don't have the path to, or the track to prison and the track to college. We need to start early on. We need to start well before these folks hit the correction system or the criminal justice system. And that is basically, in a nutshell, what I envisioned a 2808 to be. It's going to be a different number, of course, this year. But I'm looking forward to running that legislation. I'm looking forward to folks actually rolling up their sleeves on both sides of the aisle and both chambers to really get this done. It's important that we do this. Arizona has gone years and with a criminal justice system that is near broke. And I'm not talking financially, I'm talking broke in just the operation of it. It's time we fix it, and it's time that we move forward with the rest of the nation.
Let me go to James real quick. James, you've seen 2808 from this year. You've heard Representative Blackman sort of describe what he wants to do next year. Any thoughts or suggestions, sir, to improve this legislation?
Well, Luigi, we've had an opportunity to review the preliminary draft of the legislation that's going to be proposed, and we are in support of that. I'd like to point out that if Representative Blackman's bill were to pass, one of the things that would result as a further result of reducing the prison population is that it would free up some money for some other things. And one of the things that we think should be concerned to everybody, the medical care in prison. It is right now, it is truly atrocious. As a second matter, we also are concerned about the ombudsman bill because, quite frankly, what we hear from prisoners is that the Department of Corrections is not doing with regard to COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic, what they say they are doing. And so there are issues here about how the Department of Corrections is handling things. There are issues about how much money is available for additional staff, or additional medical care, for additional programs, for people to accept responsibility for their crimes and actually deal with the issues that brought them to prison. This is a mix of issues, but it starts with freeing up the prison population, because that then frees up money and it provides an opportunity for more programs, more staff, more treatment, and hopefully better medical care.
James, you were cutting in and out there for the last 5 seconds or so. Can you?
I'm sorry, Luigi, you're cutting out with me too.
Yeah, sorry, we seem to be having internet issues. It's going to get resolved. I was just saying, you were cutting in and out for the last, 5 seconds or so. If you can just repeat your
Yes,
sentences.
we just think that things start with freeing up the prison population, reducing the prison population, which then frees up money for more staff and more treatment programs and better medical care for prisoners.
Thank you for that. Senator-elect Engel, ma'am, I know that one of the things that you're looking at is the idea, in fact, of an ombudsman or an oversight committee, something like that. Can you tell us what exactly you're looking at next year, and the kinds of collaboration on see?
Well, with respect specifically to that bill, the idea of an ombudsman, what we're really looking for is having some kind of apparatus of oversight of what's going on in the prisons. You know, I know that Middle Ground has had the same frustration, you know, the families of the incarcerated, advocacy groups, just the general public of really knowing what is going on in our prisons. The Department of Corrections has really shut down the information, and they've instituted a much more restrictive policy with respect to the ability of staff or inmates to talk to the press. And so we don't know really a lot of things that are going on, and we don't have the confidence that the Department of Corrections is addressing complaints, that they're dealing with security issues appropriately, that they're dealing with healthcare, other types of abuse that might be going on in the prison. So we need to have some kind of apparatus. So it's been suggested to have an ombudsman. I think this is an excellent idea. I also think it'd be important to have a citizens oversight committee that is connected to that ombudsman. But we've got to have some kind of more oversight and communication with the public about what is going on. We shouldn't be looking at tweets on our phone to find out, you know, what is actually the status of healthcare and things in the prisons. So I'd say that's a very important effort that we need to address.
Luigi, Middle Ground has previously been appointed to constituent services committees, that sort of thing. And what we have found is that if the committee or if the ombudsman or whatever you want to call it, if it has teeth and it can order changes to policies in the Department of Corrections, then there's going to be massive resistance at the legislature, both behind the scenes and in public. If it doesn't have teeth, if what it can do is just make recommendations or make findings, then what happens is that there's no change. And that is what has happened in the past. We think that an oversight committee is a great idea. We just want to point out the realistic problems that it presents, because people who are in power don't want to have their hands tied. We doubt that the governor is going to approve a committee or an ombudsman who is going to be able to order the Department of Corrections to make changes. And on the other hand, if all they can do is make recommendations, then realistically what the past shows us is that they're not going to make any changes. It's going to be business as usual. We are not opposed to it. We simply want to point out the realistic limitations that there are to such a thing.
Let me go to Representative Blackman.
Can I jump in and comment on that? I just wanted to say, I mean, clearly I agree with Mr. Ham. I think some kind of committee that actually did have the power to actually order changes would be better. But if we can't get through the legislature, I don't think that this is just painting over the problem. You know, one of the bills that I've looked at, you know, has at least the authority of the ombudsman to request and get information, sort of subpoena power from the Department of Corrections can issue reports and can ask that the department respond to those reports. So something maybe even less than that authority to change things, I think could still have a big impact on what we know and correcting the problem.
Thank you, Senator Engel, and thank you, James. I want to go to Representative Blackman, sir. I think there's the question of an oversighting this or setting this up two ways. One is a panel that makes recommendations, and typically when that happens, and kind of nothing happens, right? Because it recommends and the recommendations can be ignored. Another one is it happily has teeth, and it has, it's not just able to recommend, but it can actually, to a certain extent, require certain actions to be made. I want to get your thoughts on those, on this one, sir. If there's going to be an oversight committee, what's your preference?
So just let me go into this a little bit. When I was in the service, the military, we had to always uncover our dirty laundry to the public because taxpayers' dollars were going to the military, to the DOD. And sometimes folks don't like that. We had a system called the IG system that with checks and balances to make sure that we were doing what we were supposed to do and spending taxpayer dollars appropriately. This is the same thing. We are housing people. We have people that are under our care in the state. Now, we do a real good job at putting people in jail, and I am tough on crime, but we need to be smarter on reform. Part of reform is this ombudsman committee. Now, what the recommendations that we're talking about, the bill they'll have subpoena power to get these records, find out medical issues that are going on, and quality of life things that are going on in these prisons. But the recommendations will come back to the committee, come back to the Criminal Justice Reform Committee, which will turn into legislation, because we know a lot of people don't like change, but they'll have to change with legislation that's required to do that. And I think that that's what's going to change some of the issues in our prisons. If we have an outside agency looking at the problems of the agency, and they have these recommendations, and it's taken to the legislature to make legislative changes that turn into law, that is going to be the teeth in these bills. Now, again, I know that folks at the DOC are not going to like this. That's why a member of the Ombudsman Board is part of the DOC. To have their input. We want to be able to do that, but it needs to have teeth. And in order for us to change what's going on in the DOC and our criminal justice programs, we need to have that. And when we go through the criminal justice reform changes, there are going to be a lot of things that are going to be uncovered. It's called peeling back the onion. And the more you peel back that onion, the more it stinks. And some folks aren't going to like the smell of that. But in order for us to fix our system in criminal justice, we have to get to the root of some of these problems. And sometimes it's going to be very painful for people to do. So that's part of change, and that's part of reform.
Luigi, I would just like to say that Middle Ground is very much in support of ideas like this. It's just that we have concerns about how effective it can be. But certainly we would be in support of bills to create a committee, to set up a criminal justice reform committee, and to have some teeth to it. We are just concerned about how effective ultimately it will work out. But we are definitely in support of it because we recognize, perhaps more than anyone else, just how bad things are in the Department of Corrections and how many issues really need to be resolved.
Thank you, James. Senator Engel, one of the things that you're looking at for next year is the idea of compassionate release. In fact, under that purview, I do want to ask you about one idea that has been out there for a couple of months now, which is for a certain population of our inmate, certain a part of our inmate population to be able to be released back into the public because of COVID-19 concerns. I want to ask you just a little bit where you're at in that. What's the difficulty in actually getting that accomplished?
Well, I think this is just so important. I mean, I think we were all rocked by the news of just a few days ago that over 50% of the inmate population in the Yuma facility has COVID-19. We had a similar, very big outbreak in the Tucson facility. So this is really scary. You know, folks in these prisons, you know, we can't think of them as separate from the community at large. I mean, these are fathers, sons, you know, daughters. You know, over 1,000 inmates are actually released every month. You know, they've done their sentence, they're coming back into the community. Staff members, they live in the community. There's a lot of back and forth here. So what's going on in the prisons right now with respect to COVID is also a reflection, and it will impact the larger community because it's interconnected. I think that we are not, from what I can see, really taking the precautions. DOC is not necessarily, I just don't have the confidence that the prison is the best place for everyone. There's a predominantly older population of inmates. Many of them have pre-existing conditions that make them vulnerable to disease. And right now, we just don't have any real way of protecting those people other than what DOC is doing, which seems to be sort of shifting people around within the complex. I think that we should have right now authority in our statutes. And I think this should be a priority for the 2021 statute to give more authority to DOC to provide for potentially releasing people to home arrest for short periods of time, to grant, you know, furloughs or temporary removals for people who are very vulnerable to the disease, to give the governor actually a bit more authority to grant clemency for inmates' families to be able to go to court to maybe get a compassionate release, especially for those who are vulnerable, might be at the very end of their sentence now. This can reduce the prison population right now and enable DOC and healthcare providers to do a better job of taking care of our inmates. And of course, a better job of taking care of our inmates protects all of our communities.
Representative Blackman, I want to go to you real quick, sir. What are your thoughts of, you know, right now, the big question, I guess, is does the state even have the legal authority to actually release inmates, you know, back to the community, you know, under the purview of compassionate release, concerns about COVID-19 spreading in the prisons? But let me get your thoughts on this one, sir. Where are you at in just the broad idea of allowing certain populations of our inmate population to go back to the communities because of COVID-19?
Well, I think it's going to depend on the level of crime that inmate committed. If we're talking about we're wanting someone to be released from prison that is a murderer and has caused harm to somebody, then absolutely not. Number two, I think if somebody is terminally ill and they have served a significant amount of their time and they've been a model prisoner and they have a clean record, if you will, then that decision should be turned over to the clemency board and petition to that board, and they be able to have the authority through the governor's level of responsibility to that committee to make those choices. But it just really depends on the individual person and the crime that was committed.
Luigi, I'd like to make a comment. Middle Ground has multiple concerns about COVID-19 in the prisons. I mean, on one hand, Governor Ducey says that he would like to prioritize the vaccines for prison staff. We think that prisoners themselves who are unable to social distance, who are forced to have communal meals, who literally may be rubbing shoulders with people who come in and out of the prison as staff members, and with staff members who are not complying with wearing masks and the COVID-19 rules in the prison. We have concerns about that. We'd like to see prisoners prioritized at least as high as people who are in nursing homes. Secondly, with regard to the release of prisoners who are susceptible to infection, we think that process perhaps could be used if we would support a change to the bill for temporary release, which currently does not address COVID concerns. We would support changes to the bill that handle that, because it would be a faster process than going through the Board of Executive Clemency and the commutation process. That is a very slow process. And for older people who are very susceptible to the illness, who are already identified as being that, we think there should be a little faster process. It's true that we don't have authority right now. The governor can't just order mass releases. But on the other hand, for people who are not a threat to public safety, we think that those people, if they are extremely susceptible to the infection, that there should be a mechanism for them to be released, and they still would be under criminal justice supervision, and they would still be prisoners. In fact, they just would be prisoners who are on a temporary form of release. There could be restrictions applied to that, and the legislature could impose those restrictions so that it would be very similar to house arrest. We have no problem with that. The main concern we have right now is that the Department of Corrections is not doing what it says it's doing with regard to COVID-19, and what's going on at Yuma sort of demonstrates that well over 50% of the people in the La Paz unit in the Yuma complex. That complex houses just over 1,000 people. There are well over 800 people who are positive. This is a pandemic that is worsening very seriously, and we think that it is arising because the Department of Corrections is not doing what they say they're doing. So we need something with teeth.
Thank you, James. So, one of the big things that I've seen in my 13 years of covering the state legislature is the idea of mandatory sentencing, and more specifically giving judges discretion in terms of sentencing. I've seen legislation that swung the pendulum on the other side of that equation, if you will. But let me ask Senator-elect Kirsten Engel and then Representative Blackman. But first, Senator Engel, ma'am, what are you going to do insofar as giving judges the discretion, right, in sentencing?
Luigi, that's a great question. I just like to say, I think I'm encouraged right now. I think there is bipartisan support for some criminal justice reforms. I mean, let's not forget that, Arizona has the 5th highest incarceration rate in the nation. We spend over 1/10 of our budget on just the Department of Corrections. And that's not the whole apparatus of the justice system. We have 1 in 13 adults in Arizona who have a felony on their record right now. So this is something we really need to address, not just to make people's lives better, but also to help our economy, which we really need to do right now, especially with respect to the pandemic. So there's many things that we can do with respect to sentencing, which I think we've all identified as one of the drivers for the high numbers of persons we have behind bars, high recidivism rate, and high amount of money that we're spending on our system. And we can address that in various ways. I would support the Hannah Pryor's bill that we almost got across the finish line a year ago or so, which would reduce some of the sentencing practices that we've seen, which take spree crimes and make those folks repetitive offenders, and that gives them longer sentences. I'd support some of the reforms of taking away certain drug offenses as priors, which also can jack up sentences. Those are some things that have been suggested that I think are great ideas, and we should have hearings on them. And we've also had proposals for a judicial safety valve. We have judges. They are trained to look at the justice of a situation. And right now their ability to do justice and figure out the proper sentence for a certain crime, they're just shackled by these mandatory minimums that we have here in Arizona. And so what we need is authority for a judge to frankly override that and do what they think is right in the situation. Right now, mandatory minimums is helping to fill up our prisons with a lot of nonviolent offenders, a lot of drug offenders, and having judicial safety valve. There's a bill that's supported by ALEC. I have a different bill, limits judicial discretion, makes the judge say why he or she is departing from that mandatory minimum, but I think could have a big impact in terms of bringing down our incarceration rate.
Let me go to Black. We've discussed some real potential here, you know, in so far as giving the judge discretion. How is that proposal? And of course, the other proposal is how feasible are they?
I'm sorry, Luigi. Can you say that again? You broke
yeah,
up.
sorry. Yeah, we have rain here in Phoenix. I don't know if that's affecting our internet. But my question is, how realistic is the proposal of giving judges discretion, you know, insofar as you know, sentencing, but also the other potentially big legislation that we've talked about?
So I'm not a fan of mandatory sentencing. We see that it doesn't work. It worked at one time. But as my colleague, Senator-elect Ingalls said, all it does is really is filling up our prison system. Now, I believe that we should have discretion, but only to a certain degree. Now, if we're talking heinous crimes that have been committed, then I do believe that we need those mandatory sentences in place there. But when we're talking the lower level crimes, that judges can take that opportunity to look at the person standing in front of them and not just the record. I believe judges should have that discretion. A lot of times these folks are sent to prison under mandatory sentencing, and it's a drug-related charge, and they're in there for upwards to 10 years. Prosecutors will tell you that judges do have discretion. And I beg to differ. They have a certain amount of discretion, but not the discretion that they need to be able to make an informed decision to really put the person standing in front of them in the place that they need to be. Some people deserve to be in prison. Some people need to be in treatment centers. And at the end of the day, I think judges should have that ability in that category to look at the individual, look at the crime that was committed, and then from their bench with their expertise, put that person in the right place. And we've had conversations between prosecutors and what prosecutors think that judges should have, and so on and so forth. My answer to that, I'm not a lawyer, but my answer to that, if you want to have the same amount of authority and power as a judge, become a judge. That's why they're judges, to be able to make those tough decisions. Hats off to all our prosecutors; they do a great job. But that's a different category, I believe. And again, I'm not an attorney, but the job of a prosecutor is to prove guilt, not to sentence. The job of a judge is to sentence based on what that prosecutor has proven or not proven. And we have gotten away with that because of mandatory sentencing. It just doesn't work, in my opinion. I know some of my Republican colleagues may not agree with what I am saying. However, sometimes the truth hurts. And this is one of those times that it may hurt certain people. But we need to do something different than what we are doing now.
Luigi, Middle Ground has considered this whole issue, and you know there are multiple issues underneath this. So if you start increasing judicial discretion at sentencing, what happens is that you raise the specter of the very things that caused us to eliminate judicial discretion, which is preferential treatment for some and racial discrimination with regard to others. And so one of the things that we think might be more appropriate and perhaps more feasible is to limit the power of the prosecutor to allege all kinds of factors which lock in the judge's sentencing discretion. So what it would do is it would change the judge's sentencing discretion, but not by giving him more discretion, but rather by limiting the number of things that a prosecutor could do to lock in the judge, to tie the judge's hands. We think that would be a bit more effective. We also think that with this regard, you know, there is a reason why we have prior offenses alleged for crimes. Senator-elect Engel raised this. And right now there are sentencing practices where the prosecutor can essentially tie the judge's hands with regard to offenses which really aren't appropriate. As a matter of fact, Representative Blackman just mentioned some of those. We think that the Criminal Justice Reform Committee needs to take a serious look at just exactly how sentencing occurs in Arizona and just exactly how the interaction between a prosecutor's abilities to tie the judge's hands and the sentencing discretion that the judge has with regard to the size of the sentencing range. We think the Criminal Justice Reform Committee should really look at that. One of the things that has struck us is that we don't think there's another state in the union that could actually, where sentences 200 or 300 years long could be imposed. We think that's really unreasonable. I mean, that just doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's just a waste of time and effort to do that. If we're looking at the crimes that the individual committed and we have a sentence that is appropriate to that, I don't think the sentence is 200 or 300 years long.
So now let me go to some of the audience questions. There's a whole bunch of them, and I'm sorry to say we won't be able to get to all of them. But a lot of the questions focus on COVID-19 and potentially releasing prisoners. Now, I know, James, you mentioned that we don't have right now, it doesn't seem like the state has the authority to release prisoners in mass. But let me go to just really quickly, Representative Blackman and Senator Engel. What are the chances of actually the legislature getting in, first, few weeks of session and actually making this happen? How realistic is this? Senator Engel.
Luigi, I have to say, I just don't know, but I am hoping that the other members of the legislature are just as concerned as the panelists are here and those who are watching this about the situation. And, over 50% of the inmates being infected in a single closed facility, I mean, that is a real crisis. So giving DOC more authority, giving the power to go to the courts for some kind of furlough authority that we don't have in statute right now, I think it has to be the very highest priority when we go back into session.
Representative Blackman, the same question to you, sir. How realistic is this? Is this feasible in the early weeks of the session next year?
I certainly hope it would be. Again, I'll revert back to my original statement. It depends on the crime that the person committed. It depends on the category what the person is in. However, as we see in our prison systems, there's a rise of this disease in our prison system. And in order for us to get it under control, we need to take some bold steps. And one of those is making sure that if we can separate some of these folks and do it smartly, and not infringe on victims of these prior crimes, then I believe we should be able to do that. At the end of the day, we're going to have people who agree with this type of leniency. We're going to have people that are hardliners that don't agree with this. To those hardliners out there, I would ask you, if you were in a situation that many of these inmates are in with COVID and no type of relief, I think that you would be looking for relief from your legislator or legislative body to help out. Now, these folks have committed crimes, and we all agree on that. Again, it doesn't mean that we take away, we do away with their dignity. These are still human beings in there that possibly can come out of prison and contribute to society and do good things. I've met many folks that have served their prison system, their terms, and have been sick or what have you, and have come out and done great and wonderful things. Look at Mr. Ham. He's a prime example of that. So when these folks are in our care of the state, it is our responsibility as leaders to make the best decisions that are not only going to protect the community, but make sure that these folks are able to keep respect and dignity, and so they can produce when they get out. So it's a lot, and I know that was a fire hose that I just said, but we have a responsibility as leaders to choose the hard over the easy, right? And this is one of those things that we need to do.
And with that, I just want to thank James. Thank you for your time. Senator-elect Kirsten Engel, thank you. Ma'am, Representative Walt Blackman, thank you for your time. I want to thank the Middle Ground Prison Reform for sponsoring, also the law firm of Michael P. Denny, Berg Simpson Attorneys, and of course, Jones Skelton and Huckey Lee. Thank you for supporting us and supporting the Arizona Capital Times in this way. To our audience and to our viewers and to our listeners, thank you for spending the morning with us. I hope you learned something. I did. And again, thank you all. And I will see you, at some point. I'll see you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And with that, bye for now.